And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Tony Curtis. Thank you for listening. Hello, Cleo.
Hello, Richard.
How are you?
Fine. Very good. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks.
Yeah, good.
So what book have you been reading this week?
Well, this week I happen to have been reading Tony Curtis's autobiography.
Me too.
What's it called? I've put it down somewhere. What's it called?
Oh, American Prince.
That's right.
Did he call himself that? Or is that what, like, the press called
I
him?
think there's something in the middle of the book where he said something like, you can come to America and become a prince. You know, you don't have to be born into royalty.
Okay.
Because Hollywood is royalty. So you can actually become royalty if you become an actor.
Yeah, it's the American dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't have it in England. We just have King Charles and Camilla.
There's rock and roll royalty.
Oh, that's
There's
true.
acting royalty. Yeah.
You could become a sir or a dame.
Yes, and you could just become a legend.
Yeah, all right. So Tony Curtis is a prince, a blue-eyed prince.
Yeah. So what did you know about Tony Curtis, or care?
Oh, yeah, I kind of did insofar as I love old Hollywood. He obviously has a big part in all of that. I knew, well, obviously Some Like It Hot, which is a fantastic film. That's how I kind of know him from the most. And actually, as I was reading this book, I kind of realised that I never watched a single other film that he's done.
Really?
Yeah, so I know him from Some Like It Hot, as I think most people do.
To be fair, same here, but also don't forget I watched The Persuaders.
Yeah.
And we read about that with Roger Moore's book.
Yeah.
And we read about him through Kirk Douglas's book as well, because he was in Vikings and Spartacus. Yeah. So he crops up a lot.
Yeah, he does.
Like, he was best mates with Frank Sinatra, but I don't particularly remember him cropping up in any Frank Sinatra stories.
Yeah, so he might think he was a better friend of Frank Sinatra than Frank Sinatra considered him.
Yeah. But he's just one of those people, you look at him, he's got an amazing face, and Some Like Art isn't just a film we've seen, is it? It's a legendary, amazing film. I even seen it at the cinema.
Oh, me too, at the BFI, like when it was reconditioned
have
or
you?
whatever they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've read about half of a book that he wrote about making it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have yet to finish it. And now I realise he probably wrote that for money because he's always short.
Well, that's what having X amount of wives will do for you.
X amount of ex-wives. Yeah. Yeah. That hate you.
The one thing in this book that I loved reading, because I always thought that he never got on with Marilyn Monroe because of that quote that went around the world. Actually, let's talk about it. Should we just get on with it right now?
Yeah, let's just get on with it.
Okay. Tony Curtis. Not his real name.
Yeah, surprisingly. Bernard?
That's a strange name.
How do you spell that?
Is it Hungarian?
Yes. That's spelt Schwartz.
Bernie Schwartz.
Bernie Schwartz, born in 1925 in East Harlem, New York City.
But his his granddad came over from Hungary, right?
Yes.
That's how they got there. And he opened a second-hand clothing store. And I actually loved...
And he wrote...
Yeah, I loved that when he came. He wrote the grandmother back in Hungary with the children. He wrote her a letter and then she never heard from him again.
So they just turned up.
So she got on a boat with her... Yeah, she got on a boat with her children and just turned up after
and he was horrified.
a while.
Yeah, I'll send for you, honest. So the dad was already born. He was born in Hungary and came over with his mother, unwantedly.
And he was called Emmanuel, Tony Curtis's dad.
Yes, Manny.
Yeah. So the granddad had a second-hand clothing store, but the dad kind of did establish himself as a tailor, right? So he stayed in the clothing industry. And then he met a woman called Helen, and then they ended up getting married and having a baby called not Tony Curtis, called Bernie Koff.
Bernie Koff. His mum came to the USA from Hungary as well, and she came when she was 17. And so there's all those people wanting a better life, coming for wealth and a good life. And she meets this tailor and they get married. And all her other family had met people and got married and they were all really prosperous. But Tony's or Bernie's dad wasn't. And he didn't make anything more of himself than just a very small living. And his mum was furious. He said she actually had contempt for his dad. and was always yelling at him for not getting further in life.
Yeah, she thought she married a dud.
Yeah, so it was just horrible. He grew up in a horrible, horrible atmosphere of yelling all the time.
Yeah, he said that even when he was like a little boy, as soon as his dad came home from work, the screaming would start.
Yeah.
So he would go out a lot.
Exactly. And the most telling thing to me is he says when he was 15, one day he came home and his parents were kissing. And he was so shocked. He went upstairs and, not meaning to, he just burst into tears. He thought, I realised what I was missing. Suddenly, that's what it looks like to see your parents who love each other. And he just cried. And then when he came back downstairs, they were already yelling at each other again. That was the only time he saw any love between them. That one time when he was 15.
Wow.
But that's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's very sad. But at least he had his little brother, because they were really close, weren't they? And they bonded. He was 4 years younger, and he was called Julius. So he had a little partner in crime.
And he said he was a surrogate father.
Yeah, well, he said from a very early age, his parents let Tony know that his little brother was his responsibility. He was only 4 years older, but they basically said to him, you've got to look after this little boy, he's yours. So they went everywhere together, Tony and his little brother Julius.
Yeah, and he said always when they went to bed they shared a room, and that's always when they talked really heart to heart.
Yeah.
That's the most intimate relationship he ever had.
Yeah, and I think they bonded, because of course this is during the Depression. It's what, 1930s?
Well, yeah, he's born in 1925, yeah, so most of his childhood's in the 30s.
Right. And then at one point, Mum and Dad were doing so badly, they actually took Tony and Julius and put them in an orphanage for a bit.
I know, it's bad.
They weren't there for long, but that must have been a further bonding experience for the brothers, wasn't it?
I know, because he said he really realised they separated them and he was absolutely bereft and terrified. And then they showed him his brother in the other part and said he's fine. And they were only in it for a couple of weeks, he said, but it was like a massive big deal for them at that age. They were only 10 and 6. And to be left there by their parents for 2 weeks, it might not be a long time, but for 2 weeks to not know if you were ever going home, I think that's absolutely traumatic.
Yeah, but when you're 10 and 6, the concept of time is different. That is a long time.
It's a really long time.
Yeah.
Like, they were really poor. At some point, he said they were living in the back of the tailor shop, which was a condemned building. So basically, they were squatting. Yeah, by 12, he was going out to work. He was selling papers, shoe shining, doing deliveries, odd jobs, and getting money. But obviously, I imagine giving loads to his mum. But also spending anything extra he had to go to the movies, because it was totally his happy place.
Yeah, it really was.
And he says people like Cary Grant, he felt like that was his real teacher in life, his father and his teacher, because everything Cary Grant said, like, dress up like this, comb your hair like this, speak like this, he felt like he was just telling him, future Tony Curtis, how to be. And, you know, and this is the way out of here, and this is the person you could strive to be. And the funny thing is, I watched a thing about Cary Grant a while ago, and that's how he became Cary Grant, from going to the movies and feeling exactly the same about those people he saw in the movies.
Wow.
So weirdly, I suppose, even subconsciously, I wonder if there's a connection there where, you know, actually it was a fake persona, Cary Grant. I wonder if subconsciously you knew that. You knew there was another lost soul who was creating a fake persona, and you know what I mean? And thinking, I want that fake persona so I can get out of here. Because it is very stylised, isn't he, Cary Grant, really?
Yeah, he's like the perfect gentleman, yeah.
Perfect, yeah. Believably stylised. And he wasn't even American, he was English.
He's from Bristol and he was called Archibald Leach.
He was from Bristol. Whereas Tony Curtis only learned English when he was 5, and when he spoke it then for quite a long time, he had a really thick Hungarian accent, so he was always the outsider. But then when he got older, he just had this really rough New York accent, like New York, like, you know.
Is that how they talk there?
That's exactly right how they talk, actually, Richard. I've got that down. What's the point? Oh, yeah, so he also needed to learn to be an actor to become someone else as well, just like Cary Grant. They're weirdly connected. And then, of course, they become friends and they're in films together. So it's great.
We should also say that his mum actually was severely mentally ill, wasn't she?
Yes.
And he says it wasn't never diagnosed at the time, but she would probably be diagnosed as schizophrenic if she was alive now.
Yes.
I mean, that's scary for two little boys to grow up with that.
Yeah, it really explains her behaviour. He says she sometimes looked at him and her eyes started darting around and she looked scared. You know, it's that sort of thing. But way later in the book, when he's having therapy, he mentions that he was beaten all through his childhood. He doesn't actually talk about that.
Generally, he talks about his childhood as an energetic, proactive little boy, even though home isn't great. He's out, he's working, he's getting money, he's going to the movies. He doesn't talk about it in a depressing way, but the reality of having a schizophrenic mother, and you're right, he says in therapy that he was beaten, but when he talks about his childhood, he doesn't talk about being beaten.
Yeah, between the lines, she beat his dad and him, I think, and the kids. I mean, she was a real troubled woman, and he really needed to get out. Oh, I know when he said it. It was when she was dying in hospital. That's when it came out, because he was walking down the corridor. He knew she didn't have long to live.
Oh.
And he could hear her going, Tony, I need Tony. And he actually stopped in his tracks and he said the horror of his whole childhood and all the beatings and all the trouble she'd put him through just took over him. And he stood there frozen. The nurse said, your mum wants you. And he said, I know. And then he just left. And he never saw her again. He actually, at the last turn, just went, no, I'm done with this. I don't have to put up with this anymore. So, yeah, she was really, really tough. Definitely.
Oh, poor little boy.
But troubled, so you can't blame her.
She passed some of that on to him, the mental illness, because he does talk about suffering depression from an early age. And then he says that even at the age of 90, he still has overwhelming bouts of severe depression. And he mentions it, and he does it. If you read this book and you didn't read those sentences about where he reveals he has depression, you wouldn't necessarily get this was a book of a depressed man.
No, you wouldn't.
He really fought it his whole life, didn't he? Like, very well.
Yeah.
But I totally get that there are episodes where this boy who turns into this man really has a hard time with depression.
Yeah, he really does, doesn't he? Yeah, he said it started when he was a kid, but he has huge bouts of it all through his adult life. Yeah, because when he's at drama school with Harry Belafonte, he said one of the things that bonded them is they both suffered from severe depression, and they try and recognise it in the other and say, oh, I see you're in it, come on, let's try and get you out of it. And they do that for each other, on and off. It's really good. As we know, it's something that often men get really afflicted with, but find it harder to get out of because they don't have a way of communicating it or admitting it.
Yeah.
So it's really good that he seemed to talk about it and have friends to talk about it with.
And of course, there is this awful episode from his childhood, which of course would just exacerbate anybody who suffer from depression. That it's basically it changes the course of his life, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So he's out with his little brother. I guess he's got to that age, like 12, where you actually don't want your little kid brother hanging around with you all the time. You want to go out with other 12-year-olds and raise mischief, and having an 8-year-old there is just a bit of a bind. So they're out. I think there's some kind of festival or something going on in the street, so it's very busy. And little Julius, his little brother, is hanging around, and Tony Curtis says, so just go off and play with your mates. And so off he goes. And then later when he goes home, his little brother doesn't come home. And then the policemen turn up at home, and he's there with his mum and dad. And the policemen say, we think your little brother's been hit by a car. He's in the hospital. And this is inexplicable. The mum and dad push little Tony Curtis forward, who's 12 years old, and say to him, go to the hospital and see if it's your brother.
I thought about that.
It's like, all right, the mum's mentally ill, but the dad, come on, the dad could go.
One of them could go with him. I really thought about that, and I thought, I wonder if they never got their English down as much as the little kid did. It's much easier for kids to learn the language. And I wonder if they were just scared of going out of their community.
Well, they could go with him.
One of them should have bloody gone with him. It's actually shocking, but I sort of thought about it. I thought maybe they're scared of...
So little Tony Curtis gets to the hospital, and the doctor says it's okay. It is his brother. Little Julius is in the hospital bed, and the doctor says, well, he's just got a concussion. He's going to be all right. So Tony Curtis stays with him and goes home a bit later.
But he said his face was almost unrecognisable. He's all bandaged up. Oh.
And then later he's just in the street and he sees his mum coming towards him, and his mum just starts screaming, Julius is dead. He's dead. And it's just incomprehensible to little Tony that his little brother has gone, not least because he was responsible for him at the time it happened.
And he told him to get lost and play with his own mates. So the guilt...
Oh, darn it. It's like the worst possible thing that could have happened to your little brother when you tell him to just go away for it.
It's absolutely dreadful.
And, he was sharing a room with his little brother, and now his little brother just isn't there anymore. It's just devastating, isn't it?
He actually said, I thought I'd never feel comfortable in my skin again. I think that's really key because he's pretty messed up. He doesn't settle. His whole life, I think, Tony Curtis, in this whole book, he's not settled. And I think it's either his character that he was born with or that actually made him never comfortable in his own skin again. He had a lot of hang-ups. I guess there's a few reasons, but that's definitely there the whole time. Never leaves you, does it?
So, yeah, life isn't great then, is
No,
it? It's
rough. So, yeah, the family moved to the Bronx at that time, and he thinks that's probably why, just to physically get away from the area. So he was getting into theatre. Firstly, it was the Hebrew theatre, and he was getting small parts. And, oh, yeah, my God, at this point, his parents had another kid, called Robert or Bobby, which he couldn't understand because he said they cared so little for the ones they already had.
Yeah, right.
Why would they want another one? So there's a new kid knocking around and he was off. He was off the first chance he could get. He was 16 and he enlisted in the Navy and he forged his mum's signature and off he went. 1942, and you might think horror, but he had a great time.
Yeah, he did.
He had a really great time. He saw not one shot fired in anger in the whole 3 years he was in the Navy.
Isn't that incredible?
He went to Paradise Islands where he just avoided. Yeah, he swam every day, travelled the world. The dream of joining the Navy is what happened to him.
Yes.
The worst thing that happened really was seeing Pearl Harbor after the attacks and seeing the wreckage, and it was a bit tense. That's all. That's the worst thing.
And he got involved in musicals and theatre that they were putting on at the Navy base, right?
Yeah.
He was still keeping his foot in, even though he was in the Navy and stuff. He was still keeping a foot in the theatrical world, as it were.
Yeah, and by the time he got out, he was 20 years old in 1945. So yeah, he goes back to New York and he's going out with his sailor suit to see if he gets attention. And he got most of the attention from men. I told you it was something about sailors.
Quentin Crisp was right.
He was right. And he was very, very pretty. He's kind of got this beautiful face that's a little bit feminine, I suppose. It's just very beautiful.
And a photographer noticed him, didn't he, and took some photos. And they ended up at a modelling agency. And then he started getting a couple of modelling jobs. So that's how good he looked. At the age of 20, walking around the streets of New York, he looked like a model and he was employed as a model.
Yeah, exactly. And he started really paying attention to himself, working out, swimming, did his hair nice, because he wanted to be an actor. He needed to look good.
Yeah.
He lived back at home, must have been a nightmare.
He said nothing had changed.
Oh, terrible, yeah. So he had to get out, and he ended up joining the dramatic workshop because they took students on a GI Bill.
Yeah.
So, the Navy were paying for it, I guess.
Yeah.
That was the only drama school that took people on the GI Bill. And at this drama school was Walter Matthau, Harry Belafonte, Rod Steiger, B. Arthur, and a year before had been Marlon Brando.
Amazing.
He really hit the jackpot of drama schools.
Harry Belafonte is just in everybody's book.
Here's like the wind.
Yes.
Blows through everybody's lives.
I hope we come across his book one day because I want to see...
If he mentions every single person who ever lived.
No, or no one.
Or no one at all.
Yeah, but I mean, what a roll call of stars, just even in his class. Amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Those were his mates, basically, as well.
Yeah, and he was proactive in his acting career. Like in this class, he was already looking further ahead. What can I do next? And there was a notice on the notice board there that the Stanley Wolfe players wanted an actor. So he went along to that and he got cast just in a small play that went on tour. And then it was whilst he was performing in that guy who run the Yiddish theatre in Chicago saw him. And he had a play on called This Too Shall Pass, and he cast young Tony Curtis in that. And so already he's now getting professional jobs and he's getting $65 a week. From drama school or whatever, he quite quickly has got on the first rung of the ladder getting paid employment as an actor.
It's pretty good. And after that summer, he was straight back to the drama school and did Twelfth Night with Walter Matthau. God, that would have been great to see. Yeah, and then they did a play called Golden Boy that a theatre suddenly went dark for a week and said, have you got anything we can put on to fill it? And the drama school said, yeah, we're doing this play. And he had a good part in it. And around that time, he'd got a meeting with an agent, Joyce Selznick, who was the niece of David Selznick. That's Hollywood royalty. That's Gone with the Wind producer and all that.
Yeah, she's very well connected. She took him straight into New York to see Bob Goldstein, who's the talent scout for Universal Studios. And his brother, Leonard Goldstein, does Universal Studios in LA, in Hollywood. And he went to meet Bob in New York, and it went well, but, no big shakes. And he went home thinking, oh, did I blow it? And then he got a phone call, and Bob said to him, somebody from our office saw you in Golden Boy, and they said you were a very good actor. He said, get on the plane to California for a screen test. Wow. So...
Brilliant. Your dream's coming true.
Isn't it? Just already they've sent him to Hollywood for a screen test. And then what's even mad, so he's on a plane going to Hollywood, and then a guy comes up to him and says, what's your name? Of course, he's still called Bernie Schwartz. This guy says to him, oh, hi, I'm Jack Warner. So the head of Warner Brothers. And
he's on the plane.
He says, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to Universal for a screen test. And Jack Warner says, if Universal ever drop you, come and see me, and I'll make you a star all over the world.
Amazing.
But he says, I'm going to change your name to Tyrone Goldfarb. So it's better that he went with Universal and became Tony Curtis.
It is, isn't it?
Tyrone Goldfarb.
You'd have had to sign that how many times?
So he's 22.
Yes.
22. He's from New York, and all of a sudden, he's well on his way to becoming a film star.
Yeah. And what I like, because Universal signed him, a 7-year contract, and what I really like is this notion, which I never really thought about, that at that time in 1948, after the Second World War, there weren't really there wasn't a youth movement in films. You've got your Cary Grants and your Pickfords and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and all those people, but nobody was young. There wasn't a youth movement, and they became the new youth movement. And in a way, I think it was almost like the Rat Pack or the Brat Pack, or they were a pack. There's men and women though. There's Rock Hudson, Debbie Reynolds, Marlon Brando, Natalie Wood, Janet Leigh, Marilyn Monroe, and Tony Curtis. Then there was Kirk Douglas. There was this whole new gang that came after the Second World War, and that he was part of. That must have been such an exciting time. And, obviously he married Janet Leigh, so that was his world. But they really were a sort of the next movement. It must have been an exciting time to be one of those people. And they're such an incestuous little gang, actually.
Well, the biggest revelation of this book, to me, knowing that Tony Curtis, I always thought that he hated Marilyn Monroe and he hated working with her.
Did you?
Yep. And actually, the first chapter of this book talks about how they both, before they were big stars, they both just arrived in Hollywood. And they pretty much fell in love and had an affair. And he talks so highly of her.
Oh, yeah.
So when I was reading this book, I thought, okay, it must have all gone sour on Some Like It Hot, because he obviously ends up hating her. And actually, that doesn't happen. But it was just so interesting to read how much he loved Marilyn Monroe.
She was absolutely the most gorgeous woman that ever happened to him. Until he met his final wife, who reminded him of Marilyn.
Right. No, this is a sentence from the book. He says, so he's talking about Marilyn Monroe and how much he loved her. He says, no other woman I've known made me feel that way until I met my wife, Jilly, almost 50 years later. You have to write that because you're still married to Jilly when you're writing this book.
Yeah. Well, she does look a bit Marilyn. You have a look at her.
But she's not Marilyn.
No, but of course, yes, so you're right.
So from that, I'm actually taking that no other woman ever made him feel that way in his entire life.
Okay, basically, he hits Hollywood. He's gorgeous, he's young, he's fit, and he pulls every woman that walks. And the first one, really, is Marilyn. It's so great to read about it. She's so mysterious until you read a lot about her. But, yeah, at that point, she was living in a motel, and he was picking her up from a motel. And he couldn't see her at the weekends, because at the weekends, she was staying with Joe Schneck, who was the head of 20th Century Fox. And he had this massive, humongous swimming pool with a lift, or this crazy house that he used to hole up with Marilyn in because he had a wife and kids. So he had her for the weekends in this amazing house. And then in the week, she was free to date whoever she wanted, secretly, which was Tony Curtis for a while. Yeah, and he was absolutely smitten with her, but they just both were up and coming and didn't have time, basically, and just wafted on their own merry ways.
Yeah, both of their careers were taking off.
But he said she was real then. She didn't even have bleached hair. You know, she was just real. And he had a big hole in the bottom of his car. You could see the road through, you know, and they were just going out on dates. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it is. So all these young actors are in Hollywood trying to get parts in films, and then Tony Curtis gets a message saying, "You look great, but can you dance?" And he's not really danced before, but he said, "Sure, yes, I can."
Yeah, the answer is yes.
And they said, "Great, come tomorrow, because we need a man to dance in a film," with Yvonne De Carlo, who I didn't know ended up being Lily Munster on the TV from The Munsters.
Yeah.
Then I watched this clip online because it's Tony Curtis's first appearance ever in film. My God, she is stunning.
Is she?
Yeah. So he says that he just had... So it's a Burt Lancaster film. And Tony Curtis says that this scene, he was on screen for 2 minutes and he even got fan mail. In fact, so much fan mail that he said that 2 minutes of screen time changed his life because the studios were like, wow, this guy's made a real impression. We need to give him bigger parts.
It's amazing.
And so he started getting some decent supporting roles. But then, of course, this is something that I don't even consider. He said that his hair really made him stand out.
Yeah.
Because all the men at that time, of course, had really closely short hair. What I find funny is that Tony Curtis's hair is considered long.
Yeah, I know.
And it just isn't.
And he says that everybody between 1949 and 1951, everyone copied his hair. He was famous for his hair. And this would include Elvis, who was only 14 when that film came out.
Yeah.
How amazing is that? That Elvis's hair might have been inspired by Tony Curtis and his tiny bit parts.
But he said that his hair really got him noticed, Tony Curtis. And it kind of, you know, he was the guy with the glossy black hair.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, it did make him very appealing to the young ladies.
Yeah.
So he got a couple of other films with like Barbara Stanwyck and Rock Hudson. So all of these actors are there together and he's making a name for himself. And then the studio noticed his popularity. So they would send him to cinemas when the films were being shown and he would be besieged by young screaming girls to the point where the studio would send him out to films that he wasn't even in.
Yeah.
Because he was such a draw at the cinemas that he always brought the crowds in to watch the movies. And I think one cinema manager said to him, "You've got to get these girls out of here. They're peeing on the carpet."
Yeah, right.
So that's the effect he was having on the young women of America.
Yeah, it's weird. See, he was Elvis before Elvis. No, you would copy his hair if he had that effect on people.
Yeah, I'd love to make teenage girls piss in public.
That's a weird superpower.
Well, they just must be so excited to see this man with long hair.
Yeah.
It's not even long.
I mean, he's got a beautiful face as well, I'll say it again. And I bet he had eyes that just I bet he had power. I bet he had laser eyes.
What, that made you piss uncontrollably?
Yes. Bladder leakage eyes.
Bladder leakage eyes. Not come to bed eyes. Bladder leakage eyes.
Okay, so here's where he's been in some silly films. And by the way, incidentally, is it incidental? But he's fallen in love with Janet Leigh. And I think partly, and I think it's because he's constantly got this inferiority complex, hasn't he? He's got an inferiority complex and he wants to punch his way out of it. And Janet Leigh was a really high-class girl. She was really bright. She graduated high school at 15. She was established as an actress. She was 23 when they met, but she'd already been married twice, and she had a boyfriend who was Arthur Lowe's Jr., who was from a theatre family, and she was also being pursued by Howard Hughes, who was extremely rich. So, if he conquered her, that made him better than all the other people that were pursuing her. You know what I mean? I think that's what it was about.
Yeah.
So he got her, and so then he married her. The studio didn't want him to, because they were just trying to promote him as a leading man. And they actually wanted him to marry his leading lady that they were pairing him up with.
Piper Laurie.
And they offered him 30 grand cash. He saw the cash and he was like, I can't do it. I want to marry Janet Leigh. So he did.
Yeah.
But those studio people were crazy. They literally treated these people like machines.
Yeah, it's incredible, actually. It does make... I mean, we know that a lot of Hollywood is fabricated and stuff, but it does make you wonder who else, what other marriages were just completely fabricated and they were paid to be in that marriage like a role.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he does talk about Rock Hudson. Everyone knows he's gay now, but nobody did then.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was scary to the studio, so they made him marry his secretary and paid her off. You know, these are people's lives. These are real people.
I bet that's going on now.
I bet it is.
It's going on now, isn't it? There's so many...
Yeah.
It's a career move to get married to another celebrity, isn't it?
But, okay, Tony Curtis is a philanderer. And he just doesn't even hide it. He's like, I got married, I was so in love. Then I shagged my leading lady, I loved her. And then I did this film with this leading lady, I fell so in love with her. We had an amazing affair. And then I did a film with my wife, and we got on okay. But I didn't really want to be typecast with her. So I really wanted to, it's like this all the way through. And then he splits up with Janet Leigh and marries someone else. And then the next thing you know, he's in love with his next leading lady.
Yeah, he's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's just...
He actually says, later in the book, he says, some people are addicted to alcohol, some people are addicted to drugs. I'm addicted to the attention of beautiful women.
Yeah, he actually is.
Well, he is, he knows it.
Yeah, and he does describe it, like you can lock eyes with somebody.
And piss yourself.
Yeah. And then their bladders just falter, and he knows he's onto a winner.
Have you left a tap running, or are you just pleased to see me?
So he has an amazing effect on women. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. And that has an effect back on him, and it makes him feel alive. But I would still say that that's him trying to conquer this massive inferiority.
Yeah, you're right.
Because that's your drug. Then you're worth something if somebody fancies you. And as soon as they start going, don't sit there, take your shoes off, blah, 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 then you don't feel special, and you need to feel special from someone else who doesn't say that yet because they're new.
She was so controlling. He said that if they would be out at a Hollywood party...
Yeah, she sounds very controlling.
Janet Leigh would look across the room to him and kind of motion that he was holding his glass wrong. And she would kind of almost like coach him of how to be in public. He said that she wanted to be with someone refined like Laurence Olivier, and he said that he was never going to be that man.
Exactly.
I think they both married for like you say, he kind of married her to prove he was better than all the other men without actually thinking if that marriage was compatible. And I think, she had all of these illustrious suitors going after her, and then she went with Tony because she's going to compare him to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And he is a bit rough around the edges. He's a New York boy.
He definitely is. He had absolutely no etiquette whatsoever. How could he? Squatting in the back of a tailor's shop.
Yeah.
He couldn't possibly, and he never paid attention at school. He actually said that he didn't even know if he was bright or not until he went to the Navy and did very, very well as a signalman. And he was obviously very bright. He just wasn't educated. So that was a big insecurity with him, not being educated. And then this girl's really educated. And half those Hollywood people didn't come up through the posh ranks. Half of those people were working class people pretending to be someone they weren't. And you didn't need to pretend. And actually just being yourself would have been the best thing he could have done.
Yeah.
Well, and was in the end, because he just went off with Frank Sinatra and went to Vegas and partied and pulled all the women and just did his own thing away from her,
Yeah.
So that's how that went down.
But he was with Janet, even though it wasn't the happiest of marriages, he was with her long enough to have 2 children.
Yeah, they stuck it out for years. He said they were faking it for years, basically, because he was sleeping with anyone, anytime he could, and then going home.
I had forgotten, and it's weird, is that one of those daughters he had with Janet Leigh is Jamie Lee Curtis.
I know, amazing. Because, I didn't know in the 80s she was in A Fish Called Wanda, which was the best film ever made that year. And she was so brilliant in it. She's so funny and she's so confident and strong and cool. And, I had no idea who either of her parents were.
Because she doesn't talk about him.
No.
And it sounds like because he left when they were very young, I think Jamie Lee Curtis was about 3, Obviously, it damaged the relationship with his daughters. He had another daughter called Kelly. And he thinks that perhaps Janet Leigh, because she was so mad at him for leaving, that she probably poisoned the daughters against him. And it kind of does seem that may well have happened.
But I can kind of see why. I mean, he's sleeping with every single leading lady ever. And then at one point, he's going to Paris to do trapeze with Burt Lancaster. And he's going, well, are you going to stay with me in Paris? She goes, I'm going to South Africa to do a film. And he's sort of resenting that she's going. But of course, she couldn't give up her career for me. And then he does say, but I couldn't give up my career for her. Then he finds a note from Bob Fosse, the choreographer, that seemed to imply they might have been having an affair. He's so livid. He goes to the Playboy mansion and just basically has a completely wild time and shagged all these women for a week. And he said he felt a lot better after that.
Well, I'm sure he did.
Before that, he felt guilty. As soon as he thinks she's having an affair, he's livid. And this crops up in all of his next relationships. If they have an affair, he's furious. And he says, well, why can I have an affair and they can't? Because I'm discreet.
I know, isn't that strange? It's all right to have one as long as you're discreet about it.
Yes. But you know what I think it is when those women have an affair, I think they're actually falling in love and trying to leave him, and that's why it's not discreet. Whereas he sleeps with everybody, but never falls in love with them. He goes back to the main woman, whereas these women are actually falling in love with the odd person and actually want to leave him for them. I've worked it out, right, because after they'd split up, him and Janet, then he marries this... I think there was a woman... Oh, I know, he marries the 18-year-old when he's 37.
Yeah, well, I think that's the final nail in the coffin of his relationship with Janet Leigh, is that when he divorces her, it's because he's fallen in love with this 17-year-old co-star that you think, oh, you stupid old man, but he's like, how old is he, 30-something?
And that's why they turned against him, because he must be evil for leaving her for this young woman and leaving the kids, which just wasn't done. And so, the studio put them in a film together, him and his young 18-year-old bride, to try and make everyone love her. And then, of course, she gives up films to have kids at 18, which he says the appeal of this young girl was that he doesn't feel like he had a proper youth, just messing around. He was so focused on his career. So he thought, this will be great. I can go to parties with my young girlfriend who isn't a mother and immature woman who's having a go at me all the time. But what he didn't realise is she was going to have his kids. So then the next film he's on, he's immediately having affairs. And when eventually that breaks down, he marries 2 more times, the same thing happens. They both have kids. All these women have kids. And it ruins it for him. And by the time he's on his last wife, very near the end of this book, he's like over 60 when he marries his final wife. He's like, I don't know what the formula is this time, but this time it's working. And I'm shouting at him through the book, because she didn't have kids. You idiot. That's the difference. You just want someone, you want a pal. You've had the kids. You've had the wife at home. Now you want fun. And you keep marrying these people who are just having kids.
He's actually had 6 wives, but he only talks about 5 in the book. Because I just went onto Wikipedia. It says he's been married 6 times. And I thought, did I skip a chapter?
Wow, he skipped one. It must have been really bad. Oh, it might have been in his coke phase.
Oh, he doesn't remember.
He might have been off his head. Yeah. Well, look, let's talk about the really cool films. Obviously, the Vikings and Spartacus, both with Kirk Douglas, are really great films.
Yeah.
And the Defiant one sounds really amazing with Sidney Poitier when they're chained together. They've had a prison break. And it was totally groundbreaking in 1958, a black man and a white man together, and realising they were the same and equal.
Yeah, they were both nominated for Best Actor at the Academy Awards. Neither of them won, but that was a real groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And of course, this is when McCarthyism and the Un-American Committee and stuff, it's really quite radical to make a film like this at this moment.
Oh, he said that film wasn't even shown in the South. It was really good for changing people's minds about racism, but it wasn't even shown in the South at all, which is nuts. And then it's time for Some Like It Hot.
And that was going to be, Frank Sinatra was going to be cast.
Yes.
Billy Wilder said, no way, he's going to be too much trouble.
Yeah, because they said he can't imagine him coming into the studio every single day and getting into women's clothes. He's not consistent enough.
Yeah, right.
So, they got Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
And, it's just brilliant. They got a female impersonator to teach them how to be women instead of a woman. Isn't that weird?
He does actually say that Marilyn Monroe, he loved working with her, but he did say that she was difficult. and she wouldn't wear any of the clothes, and she would only use her own makeup artist, and she did everything the way she wanted to do it. But what was interesting to me, so she's at the Lee Strasberg. This is at the time she went back to the Actors Studio in Lee Strasberg. But even though Billy Wilder was directing the film, Lee Strasberg's wife, Paula, was on set with Marilyn every day. And after each take, Marilyn wouldn't look to Billy Wilder. She'd look to Paula Strasberg and say, how was that? What should I do in the next take? That must have been so frustrating.
Yeah.
And I've never heard of anyone taking their acting coach onto the set of a film every day before. But I guess maybe some people did.
She was just so insecure about it. It's almost, I feel like that Paula Strasberg and Lee, they were almost like a cult of two. And they got her in their complete power. But Billy Wilder managed to tame her and actually tame Paula, because she was the problem, and get Marilyn working for him. Mm-hmm. So they actually did quite well.
They actually said the problems with Marilyn Monroe were so bad that after they filmed a third of the film, they shut down for a week and considered recasting Marilyn's part. But actually, when they looked at the footage they already shot, they were like, oh my God, she's so fantastic. Let's just put up with the trouble.
She's just so charismatic. You can't put your finger on it, but it's worth it.
And she's so brilliantly funny.
Yeah, she
And I
is.
think that's what a lot of people miss, because she's so sexy and, she has this amazing sex bomb image. She's very funny. And she's really great in this film.
She is. I actually really love her voice. I think it's a real jazzy voice, like a clarinet. It's lovely. I love her musically. People don't often talk about that either.
No, they don't. And this is where my thought that Tony Curtis didn't like Marilyn Monroe, he explains it here, because the quote that persists to this day, because obviously they have a love scene together, and he said that after that he shot that scene, one of the crew guys said to him, wow, what was it like kissing Marilyn Monroe? And he said it was such a stupid question that he said, what do you think it was like? He said kissing Marilyn Monroe is like kissing Hitler.
Yeah, it was a sarcastic comment. And apparently, that went viral, like a 1950s version of viral.
Oh, do you know what? I then saw on YouTube this week Tony Curtis doing an interview in the 1990s with Jonathan Ross in the UK.
Oh, no, they asked.
And Jonathan Ross said, you said that kissing Marilyn Monroe is like kissing Hitler. And Tony Curtis was so exasperated. He said, no. He said she was one of the most wonderful women I ever met. He said every take of that scene was wonderful. He goes on to describe what happened in his trousers when he was filming that scene.
Yeah.
So I've actually thought for the last 50 years that he didn't like her. And I only know now from reading this book, she was the woman in his life that he loved the most.
Oh, yeah, amazing, hey?
Yeah. Back in the day, I read every book going about Marilyn Monroe. It's just a shame she never wrote her autobiography, because I'd love to find it and do it on this podcast.
I know. But I found her sister's book.
Oh, I forget she had a sister.
So we've got to delve into that. I don't know if it's good or bad. I've no idea. I don't know how much her sister knew, but we'll find out. Okay, load of films happened after, obviously. Oh my God. So he did The Boston Strangler, sounds really great, with Henry Fonda. There's a few that sound great. Men in Their Jaunty Jalopies, which has got Dudley Moore, Terry Thomas, Susan Hampshire. That sounds absolutely class. There's so many films I go, I really want to see that. Sex and the Single Girl, I watched a trailer for, looks absolutely brilliant. Boeing. I didn't even know they made a film of that. I didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I just thought that was a play.
I thought it was just a play.
Tony Curtis is in the actual film. I bet that's fun.
I know. His career, when it's at its height, which is around now into the 60s, right through the 60s, is just a list of films you want to see.
He actually says that he took on a lot of films he didn't want to do because he had so many ex-wives that he needed elements.
Yeah.
He would just go for the money every time. But I think in doing that and working so prolifically, he did actually have quite a good hit rate of actual good films, actually.
He definitely did. Some funny Persuaders stories, which you'd have to read the book because we can't repeat them. Some of them you just can't repeat.
Oh my God, well, the Joan Collins ones made me hoot when I read it, because of course we read about it in the Roger Moore book.
Yeah, we did.
We read Joan Collins. Does she even mention it in her own book?
I don't think she does.
But oh my God, it's so funny.
And then this film, Sextet, which I googled. Oh my God! So that's at the top of my to-watch list.
This is with Mae West.
It was with an 85-year-old Mae West who actually wrote this film. And the famous line, is that a gun in your pocket or are you just pleased to see me, is from this film. And Alice Cooper's in it looking like a man who doesn't have makeup on, who's a pianist.
Oh, is this a clip you put on the Facebook page?
Yes.
Oh,
he's
I get it now.
He's just a pianist playing a disco tune. Oh my God, it's unbelievable.
You know what makes me laugh so much about this is because Mae West is obviously 85 and she can't remember her lines. So they put an earpiece in her and the first AD is behind the scenes telling her next line. And then they said, Tony Curtis said that the police radio interfered with her earpiece. And just so in the middle of the scene, she would say stuff like, squad cars on their way. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so basically his career died and he developed a massive coke habit which escalated to total madness.
Freebasing.
Yeah.
At the age of 60.
Exactly. He hit a drugs problem at the age of 60.
He's doing it the wrong way round.
Yes. Yeah. But it's really good in a way because it didn't tamper with his career. But it was because his career had dropped so low. But anyway, so he dropped really low and then he went to Betty Ford for 28 days and cracked it. He came out cured. That's never happened. So he wasn't a real addict. He just fell into it by accident, didn't he? Because real addicts cannot be cured in one visit to Betty Ford.
Yeah, and I also think that real addicts have the history of it in their families, and addiction is a disease, and it's a lot harder to cure. The fact that he only really got into freebasing at the age of 60, he didn't have the history of it.
No.
Like you say, it was when his career dried up. He said he could not get a single movie for years, and of course he goes to the Playboy Mansion.
When his second marriage broke up, he moved into the Playboy Mansion for 3 months. That's how you get over it.
Imagine the cleaning bill there after he made all those women piss on the carpet. So anyway, look, we need to wrap this up because we've been talking for far too long. But this is because it's such a good book. I loved it. It's like a perfect book for us because we get Hollywood and then we also get like 80s TV and Roger Moore and Joan Collins. And...
Oh, yeah, a load more stuff happened. So much happened.
Well, I love that in his older years, he would do the chat show circuit. He wouldn't act as much. But his agent said to him, you've got to stay out there. You've got to do the chat shows and stuff. But once he got clean, he seemed to just have a nice older life. And then he did marry his sixth wife, Jill. And, she wasn't starry. She wanted to save horses. And so they got a horse ranch in the California desert. And they now have 130 rehomed horses. And I love that. What a fantastic way to kind of end your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he had a long life. I can't remember how old he was when he died, but he certainly lived to 90. Was it his early 90s?
Yeah, he had a long life.
And it is amazing that he was a little boy in poverty. And that horrible tragedy that happened to schizophrenic mom. And, at the age of 16 to run away to the Navy and then to establish an acting career. That is the American dream, isn't it? Like this book is called An American Prince. That is the perfect embodiment of the American dream. You come here with nothing and you can die a prince.
And snog Marilyn Monroe.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.